Craven E21 writes, "It's always been a goal of mine to buy a home, and it's something I've been thinking about again recently. Hearing your perspective was helpful in giving me some other things to consider in the renting versus buying consideration, so thank you. You're welcome. I'd definitely be interested in hearing more from you on this subject." Great, let's do that. Thank you so much for the comment. I'm more than willing to expand on this topic. For those of you who haven't already, definitely go back and watch the video on how to find the perfect apartment, where I talk a little bit about why buying a home isn't necessarily the financial slam dunk that it's sometimes made out to be. I want to start by saying again that there are plenty of completely legitimate lifestyle reasons that have nothing to do with finances that make buying a home a perfectly good decision. Whether you want a bigger yard, or the school district that you want to live in doesn't have great rental stock, or maybe you just want to be able to modify your home more than you can when you rent. The audience for this video is somebody who is fine renting. They probably live in an urban core, but they're worried that they're throwing away their money by renting, so they've been considering buying. This is a purely financial analysis of the renting versus buying decision. Also, I need to reiterate that this is just my personal opinion. It doesn't substitute for professional, legal, financial, or real estate advice. The easiest way to work through this is to create a few hypothetical people and then use them as examples. Let's say that they all work downtown and they'd like to live as close to work as possible. The first has a pretty good amount of savings in the bank. Let's say that they have enough to put 20% down on a home. They've been renting for a while, but they're afraid that they're wasting their money in doing so, so they're thinking about buying. We'll call this person Harry. The second is in a very similar situation, except they don't have as much money in the bank. They can only afford to put 5% down on the home. We'll call them Ron. The third really doesn't have any interest in all of the strings that are attached to buying a home, but they have just as much money as Harry does. So instead of buying a home, they're going to put that down payment into the bank, and then they're going to invest the monthly expenses that they're avoiding by not buying a home. We're going to call them Hermione. We're going to assume that they all make $120,000 a year and that they don't want to spend any more than 30% of their take-home income on housing. That leaves them about $2,100 a month. I'm being a little bit generous there by assuming that they live in a state without an income tax, but that's mostly just to keep things simple. I'm also running all these calculations based on Seattle, but you can adjust the numbers for where you're looking to buy. The system and the principles remain the same. So we're going to run all those numbers, see how much everything costs for each person, and then see what their financial situation is like after 10 years. All right, let's go to the spreadsheet. We're keeping their housing payment at around $2,100 a month, and we're assuming that they have good enough credit to get a prime interest rate. That puts Harry at about $475,000 to spend on a home, and Ron around $400,000 to spend on a home. I found a condo for both Harry and Ron. I made sure that they both had at least 2 bedrooms so that if they decide to start a family within the next 10 years, they have a little bit of room to grow into it. I didn't have to do the same thing for Hermione. Since she's renting, she can move pretty much whenever she wants if changes in her life dictated. Harry was able to get this 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo in Fremont. It's pretty close to downtown, but he won't exactly be walking. He'll have to use public transit or consider getting a car. Ron was able to get a 2-bedroom, 1-bath condo in North Beacon Hill. It's a little bit further from downtown, but he'll still be able to use public transit, even though it will take a little bit longer. It's more likely that Ron will have to get a car. Hermione lives right downtown. It's very easy for her to walk to work, restaurants, grocery stores, whatever she needs. Again, it's not something that she's going to grow into, but that doesn't really matter. We'll be using these 3 properties to run the rest of our analysis. Harry was able to buy his home for $475,000 and he put 20% down. Ron bought his for $400,000 and put 5% down. They both then have a mortgage of $380,000. Even though we both gave Harry and Ron pretty good credit, Ron still has a slightly higher interest rate because he didn't put as much down. This is a really good example of why you should try your best to put 20% down if you are going to buy a home. Even though Ron's home is worth considerably less than Harry's, he had to borrow the same amount of money, and that financing is going to be more expensive, making it that much harder for him to get ahead financially. Next, we have the uninvested expenses that come with buying a home. Ron has to purchase private mortgage insurance, or PMI, since he put down less than 20%. This is another fun way that we make home buying even more expensive for people that have a hard time affording it to begin with. They both have HOA fees since they're condos. The rule of thumb is to estimate the annual cost of maintenance to be 1% of the value of the home, but I've dropped that a bit since these are condos. We're prorating the annual cost monthly. We're prorating the property taxes too. I'm giving the home buyers another little break here. If the home appreciates in value every year, then so will the tax assessment for that home, which means that the property taxes are going to keep going up over time. For this analysis, I'm just going to keep them at 2020 rates for the whole 10 years. Again, mostly just to keep it easy. But it's important to keep in mind that during this time, Hermione incurs none of these costs while she rents, and instead she's putting that money in the bank. Now let's look at what happens in 10 years. I'm estimating that the homes will appreciate at an average of 2% and 2.2% a year over the next 10 years for the home buyers. Skeptics will note that this is quite a bit lower than the growth we've seen over the last 10 years, but these are the numbers that most experts predict. That puts the value of Harry's home at $579,000 and Ron's at $500,000. We're going to assume that Harry and Ron sell their homes at the end of that 10 years and then compare the financial situations between them and Hermione. It's actually pretty expensive to sell a home. Right off the top, unless you use a discount brokerage, 6% of the sale of the home will go to the buying and selling brokers. Additionally, it's recommended to plan to spend at least 1% of the value of the home on preparing the home to sell and staging it. Then there's another 1% in title and escrow fees. Then, once the house is sold, you still need to pay off the remainder of the mortgage. After all of that, Harry's net proceeds from the sale is $243,268. Ron's is $166,626. That isn't too bad for a $95,000 and $20,000 investment. However, we're not done yet. We still need to factor in the uninvested expenses that came with purchasing the home. We also want to give them credit for the money that they save on income taxes with their mortgage deduction. After we do, the final proceeds are $123,964 and $92,392. They're starting to look a little bit less impressive now. But what about Hermione? How did she fare? Well, instead of putting the $95,000 into a down payment, she put it into the bank. Then she put the $1,209 per month that Harry had to put into his home into the bank as well. To be fair, her rent also does increase over time, so we'll account for that too. At the end of 10 years, Hermione's $95,000 is $233,839. Without even investing the money, Hermione comes out almost $110,000 ahead of Harry. If she does invest it and the market returns a measly 2.5% per year, she has $308,000. So why is the conventional wisdom about buying a home so wrong? Well, there's two main reasons. The first is that we really take for granted just how expensive homes have become. If you adjust for inflation, the median price for a home in America is almost $100,000 more than it was 40 years ago. And it's not like our wages has kept pace with that. It's just way harder to get into the market. And once you do, you're relying on the home appreciating by quite a bit more in order to get a return on your investment than you would have needed to in the past. Then the second piece is that most of the time when people are doing these comparisons, they never assume that the renter has the wherewithal to save the money that they don't have to spend on a home that they bought. They assume that they're going to just spend it all. Mostly because people kind of assume that renters are all responsible. But be that as it may, if you assume that the renter plans ahead and saves that extra money, the tides turn dramatically in their favor. Because saving money every month is way more reliable than hoping that your home just goes up in value a lot. At the end of the day, the American economy relies on us spending a lot of our money and not saving very much. So we're encouraged to do things that inject our incomes back into the economy, like buying a home or spending all the money that comes along with it. It helps drive economic growth for the economy, but not for us as individuals. It's becoming harder and harder for us to afford to do that. The economic landscape just isn't like it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Millennials are playing by a different set of rules. When all is said and done, we're much more likely to regret not having saved enough for retirement than regret not buying that house. Hopefully, and I'm pulling for you, we can afford to do both at some point. But we have to be honest with ourselves that it's becoming harder and harder to do that every day. Thanks for watching this video. I hope I've given you a little bit more to chew on when it comes to this really important life decision. Like I said in the apartment video, When I was a real estate broker, working with home buyers was my favorite part of the job. But the biggest reason why I left that career was because far too often I was working with home buyers who, in my heart, I didn't think they were making the best financial decision for their future. Not to say that buying a home is always the wrong financial choice, but I think for millennials especially, the rules have changed and we're not really catching up to that quickly enough. I'm going to continue making videos around that topic in particular, so be sure to comment down below and give me some feedback on these topics. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday.